Hi, this is AJ. Welcome back to the handyman process. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to go from a sink like this to one like this. All right, so the first thing I have to do here is, I got the faucets, it's on right now. So I need to go in and remove that faucet and go to the next step. All right, so step number one, I'm underneath the cabinet here. I'm turning off the valves and I'm verifying with the faucet up there that the water is not running. If the water is running, you may have to go out to the street and turn off the valve. But once I verified that, it's just a matter of disconnecting the plumbing. So I'm going to start with the P-trap here and just pop that off. And you're going to want a bucket, some towels and whatnot underneath here. All right, so I got all those pieces off. Next, I'm going to just get a wrench and disconnect the water lines here. And keep in mind when you disconnect these, the water's going to come running out a little bit. Not much, but whatever's left in the line. So just have a bucket or some towels underneath there. All right, so I just got the faucet out. There's plenty of videos on how to take a faucet out, but you saw a time lapse on that. So now I have this out. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to probably take the drain off and then lay out the template for the new sink. Okay, so now that I got all the plumbing disconnected, the next step is open up the box. So what I have here is I have an IKEA Backsjon or Backsjon, however you pronounce it, sink. This is what it looks like. It's pretty lightweight. It's comes with one big unit, but one thing to note here, it's open in the back, and I'll explain how that could be a little bit of an issue a little later on. But the template that it comes with, and put this down, is basically this thing, right? When you open up the instructions, you'll have these two arrows on it, and this represents the cut area. So what I do is I lay it out over here and I trace that cut area. I've already done another one in this bathroom and I created a template for it. So what I did is I put it on a piece of cardboard to make it a little bit easier. I traced it, and then now I can just take that and put that on top there. It's much easier to trace that way. Another thing to note with this template as well is that it's curved here, and if you're cutting into marbled or cultured marble, it's tough to make these turns. Plus, this overlaps a little bit with the thick part back here. So what I'm probably going to do, and I verified that it doesn't really affect the structures, I'm probably going to make a straight line here to here. That way the cuts are just much easier. So I'm going to get that all set up, traced out, and kind of show you what I mean. All right, so now I got the template laid down. I'm just kind of moving it back and forth to make sure it's centered. If you're really anal, you can get out here with a tape measure, but I can just use my fingers. I'm spot on right there. I'm pushing it to the back. And one thing to note, if you have this bend here in the back of your sink, a lot of them will have, if it's cultured marble like this, it'll be like one piece. What that does is it prevents the back of the sink from sitting flush. So it's actually going to stick out like the width of a pencil. And that's where that issue with the open back sink I mentioned, if water got over that, it can come back around. So I have a plan to kind of take care of that I'll be showing you later. But now that I have this in, it's just as simple as going around and tracing this thing. Laid out fine. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to be covered up with the sink once the sink's installed. So I'm getting kind of a rough measurement. Back here in this back area, if you look underneath your sink, it's very, very thick here, right? Because the thickness of the sink. So that's the area that I was a little bit concerned about. So I pull that out. Now I have my template there. And what I'm going to do is, using the straight edge here, I'll just reuse this thing. I'm just going to kind of trace a line. That was a bad line. I'm going to trace a line and just kind of get rid of that bend. So now I got kind of triangular cuts. I still have them around the edge here. That's not so bad. Back here, it's a little tougher because of the thickness of the material. Now that I got that straight, it's on to the next step. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to try to cut down. This makes a mess. It makes a real big mess. So make sure you clean up the area around it and prepare for a bunch of dust. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a garbage bag and I'm going to kind of tape it all around the sink. So as the dust starts to come down, it falls into this box. In addition to that, I'm going to use the box that the sink came in and kind of wedge it underneath there so that it's holding up the sink. That way the sink doesn't just kind of rip out when I do my last cut. All right, so the next step is I'm going to drill a couple of starter holes in the top of the countertop so that I can get my jigsaw in. So what I'm using is I'm just using like a masonry bit or something that's pretty strong to drill a hole into there. I'll probably drill a couple of ones, that way it gives me a little bit of flexibility when it comes to the cuts. So let me go ahead and drill those and then I'm going to start the cuts.
All right, just make sure you have a good quality drill bit. And you see me putting on a respirator here. This stuff is pretty toxic. It smells bad, but it's almost like cutting into like a really hard plastic. So I'm drilling a couple holes just so I'll be able to get my jigsaw into those holes and start cutting. All right, so I have the jigsaw in now. And what I'm using is a diamond coated jigsaw blade. You're gonna need something tough like that to cut through this material. And as I'm going along, you'll see me spraying some water down there. That's to lubricate it and cool it down. That bit gets really hot, it'll start to smoke, and it kicks out a lot of dust and kind of some toxic material. So I'm doing a little bit of both. I'm using the vacuum, I'm using the spray, and I'm just taking my time, kind of going around slowly. In the front of the sink here, the material is a little bit thinner because I'm not cutting through the actual sink itself, I'm cutting around it. So it goes fairly smooth on this. The toughest cuts that I ran into on this project are in the back where I start to cut through the thicker part because I can't go too far behind the sink, so I actually have to cut through the sink a bit. And you'll see I'll switch tools later. I actually broke a few of the drill bits as I was trying to go through. A lot of times these diamond drill bits or saw blades are expensive. This one only happened to be like $8 or $9 at Lowe's, so it wasn't that bad that I was going through a couple of them. I think on the total project I went through, I broke 2 for sure, and I think I'm still on my third one. You can see that in my hand there. Anyway, the trick here is go slow. Anticipate you're going to break some blades. I have a couple extra ones on standby, and you can see here this is the Bosch saw blade that I was using. Fairly straightforward. Again, I'm going around slowly but surely making cuts. I'm drilling a few more holes here to help me out to position the saw. In the final cuts here, I switched over to a diamond bladed angle grinder to make those last kind of final cuts. So you may have to use a combination of both of them to get the full cuts. As I make the last cut here, you can see that the sink falls out. I just had a hammer kind of sticking up through the drain so I could pull it up. Now I'm just kind of cleaning up the mess that's left behind, and I'm going to do a quick test fit to see have I cut the proper hole. I got to clean up a little bit so I'm not making a mess. But even though I followed that template, things may not sit perfectly. So in a minute here, I'm going to go back through after I clean it up a bit, go back through, make sure that I have a decent fit. I put it on here and you'll see I have a little bit of a gap there in the front. I wasn't sitting completely fine, so I had to go back there, grab my angle grinder, and I'm just going to grind out a few spots that I need to kind of pull back a little bit in order to get a good fit. Once I grinded that out, did a second test fit, everything sat good.
All right, so I just finished cutting everything out, setting it back in, and now what I'm going to do is before I actually silicone this thing down in there, I like to put the plumbing on first. And IKEA comes with its own kind of unique plumbing setup. So I'm going to put my respirator back on just because it's still a little smelly in here from all the dust. And I'm going to do a voiceover kind of explaining what I'm doing.
Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of grab the packets that I need, make sure that I have everything. Pull out the instructions. Here's a quick snapshot of that. All this stuff comes with instructions, but one of the reasons that I made this video is sometimes it's hard to truly understand what you're doing with these things. So I'm trying to help out a little bit by walking you through. In this case, the visuals are pretty straightforward, but this was actually the second sink that I had done. The first one I had done, this little overflow drain thing, it was a little bit tricky to figure out. The picture said it should be one way, it really didn't fit that way. So here what I'm doing is I'm putting in that's the overflow drain and a little bit of a ring that kind of goes around that. And I'm going to tilt up the sink here. And you have this kind of angled rubber piece, it's a flexible rubber piece, and it sits over both where the drain comes out from the top of the sink as well as connecting into the bottom. In this case, I have to cut it a little bit to make it fit a little bit more snug. And you'll see that kind of instructions telling you to do that within the instructions there. So make small cuts would be my recommendation. And I'm cleaning it up here. You can use sandpaper. I'm just using a utility knife to clean off the edges, make sure that they're not sharp. Once that's all cleaned off, I'm going to do another test fit. I'm basically going to snap everything back together. Again, it's a loose fit. I'm going to put it back up and see how it feels. The big thing here is you don't want pinching in that little rubber sleeve. If it's pinching, it won't drain properly. So now I'm going to connect the two pieces by holding the drain on the back side, and then from the front side, I'm using that little decorative cap that's at the top of the sink. And I'm just going to slowly kind of put it in with my fingers there to make sure that it's kind of snug. The second thing I'm going to do is you also have to buy this plumbing kit that comes from IKEA. The concept is the same as normal American plumbing, but the execution is a little bit different. Again, in the instructions, you'll kind of see what you need to do. For this particular sink, the drain, in a lot of sinks that you have, that little overflow is actually part of the sink. When they cast the sink or they make the sink, it's all incorporated. Since this sink is not like that, what I have to do is, first of all, I put the overflow drain on, and then I'm going to connect the bottom, the traditional drain, if you will, to the bottom of that overflow. So here I'm just kind of lining things up. Again, it's still loose, but what I'm demonstrating is the nice thing about the IKEA stuff is even after you put it on, you can kind of slide it around as you need to, which works out pretty good. Now that I have that, I'm holding it on the back end. I'm taking the drain and I put it in there, and this comes with a little tool, this little yellow thing, and I'm actually putting a screw, and I'm using that screw to basically screw all those things together. And I'm just testing that everything looks good. If it's not lining up properly or you see daylight, there's a problem. So just make sure that you take your time. Everything should fit smoothly. There should be, nice smooth movement within that. Once you have that, then you're kind of good to go. Again, you can do this after the fact, but it's much easier if you're doing it now before you glue the sink down. And the final thing, that little yellow tool also comes with a little rubber grommet here, and this is how you spin and lock up that final piece of the overflow drain. So I'm just tightening that up a little bit. Hand tight's all you need on this thing, and I'll be testing, in terms of waterproofness. Once I have everything set up, I'll make sure that it's completely waterproof and nothing's leaking out of there. All right, now that the drain's taken care of, we're going to go ahead and put on the faucet. You can see the name of the faucet there. This is just a standard faucet from IKEA. Nothing super fancy about that. So I'm just going to slide the hoses down through the top hole there, cut off a few things, and then I'm going to kind of twist it over on its back. And what I did is I took off that little O-ring and a little plastic nut that holds it all together. I'm just going to slide that back over, make sure that I get a nice kind of snug fit. Once I tighten it all down, I'm going to turn it back over, just check the position of the faucet, make sure it's still pointing straight, everything's tight, there's no issues there. This is why it's easier to do it when the sink's out. If you don't do that, you'll be doing it on your back. All right, on to the next step. So the next step, I want to essentially glue this thing down with silicone to the countertop, and that's what the instructions tell you to do. I run a handyman business. I didn't mention that at the beginning, but I do these types of things a lot. This actually happens to be in my own house. But when I do these types of things, I don't like a big cleanup mess. I like a nice clean look. So I use that tape to kind of outline the sink, and I'm going to just put a bead of silicone caulking all around. And the idea is once I put the sink back on top of that, it's not only going to seal it, but it's going to squeeze out past that blue tape. And I put blue tape both on the countertop and the sink. And then what that does is once it's all set and I got my, make sure that the offsets are pretty good, I could just take my finger and I can run my finger with a wet paper towel around the edge. And what that's going to do is it's going to make sure, first of all, that I have silicone all around the edges, which I did. Actually, I think I had to touch up one spot there. But I'm getting a nice, smooth, clean look so that once everything is done and I pull off that tape, it looks perfect, right? It looks like a perfect caulking seam. And that's exactly what I got. And you want to pull the tape off while it's still wet. If you try to wait, otherwise it's going to pull out the silicone. So that's all I do there. And then once you have this in, you have to wait 3 hours.
So in the last video, you saw me put the sink in. I did the silicone caulking. You gotta let it sit for about 3 hours. So I let it sit overnight. Now what I have to do is, as you can see, none of the plumbing is hooked up. So I got the faucet in, I got everything else. And like I mentioned in the previous video, it's easier to do that stuff before you put the sink in. You can always do it afterwards, but it's just easier. So now that I have that, then I'm going to put this Renilene. This is an IKEA brand of plumbing stuff. The concept is the same. You have a P-trap that goes down, but how it connects up is a little bit different. So I'm just going to kind of walk through the instructions, follow through, and then provide a voiceover of what I'm doing.
All right, so we're underneath the cabinet now. Everything else was hooked up in the previous steps. So now it's just a matter of connecting the drain down to where it exited out through the wall there. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm just sliding it on. You saw those two black like O-ring things. This pipe just slides right over that. Real nice, smooth, clean finish. Here I have the P-trap, and I'm noticing that, oh, okay, the drain on my wall is actually a little bit lower than how far the pipe from IKEA comes down. So in order to fix that, I have to extend that pipe. So the takeaway here is don't throw away the old stuff you had when you took the other sink out, because I had to reuse that. I just took some of that pipe, cut it off, and I'm just making sure that the geometry fits here. So I'm moving stuff around. That big vertical pipe that's coming down, this is where it's great that you can move that around real easy, because I can make sure that it's working no problem.
All right, so I got that all installed. One thing that I had to do is the kit didn't come with this little piece here. I had to reuse that from when I took the old sink out, just because this drain down here was a little bit lower, and the pipe that comes from IKEA wasn't long enough. So the point there is, don't throw away the stuff you have that you took out, because you may need it, or you may need to run to the store to get some more stuff. You may have noticed as I was joining all this stuff together, I was just making sure that I had the seals in between them. If you don't have these are the primary cause of a leak. Even if you do have them, I'm going to run water through this in a second, and we'll see if it leaks or not. Sometimes you got to tweak them down a little bit, move them around, so we'll see what happens.
All right, now that I have all the drain plumbing hooked up, I'm just going to hook the water lines up. These are pretty straightforward. The red one goes to the hot water side. The other one goes to the cold water side. Just make sure you're tightening these things down with a wrench. You're going to check those for leaks when you're done. Once that's done, it's pretty straightforward. Next step is going to go make sure that the drain is working properly.
All right, so I just turned on the water. I'm going to test the faucet out right now. It's going to come out a little dirty, some of the lines. I'll talk about cleaning that out in a minute. But I'm going to let some water run through there. I don't want too much. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open that up and come down here and see if I have any leaks. I'm going to do a little bit at a time. I don't feel anything. I'm going to fill it up a little bit more. Open it up. I'm just feeling around the connection points here. I'm looking up at the bottom where it's joining up there. So I might have got lucky here. I don't see or feel any leaks. So the next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that when it goes through the overflow here, that it's not leaking out of that. So I'm going to fill it all the way up. All right, so it's draining down there. I just checked the bottom. I don't see anything leaking. Now I'm going to let it all out and really test the draining system. Now I got full pressure coming through here. That was just a little bit of water that was on my finger. Actually, yeah, have a little bit of a leak. I have a little bit of a leak here, so I need to tighten that up just a bit. So every time you do it, you gotta dry it off, make sure you're not seeing old water then I'm going to test it again. All right, so I did one more drain test. I tightened it up and it was fine. Now the last thing I want to do is I want to take out the aerator here and clean it out. So it says you can use, I don't know if you can see this. You can use a penny. That's what it shows actually in the diagram. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a flathead screwdriver and I'm going to put it into that slot. All right, I'm going to take this out and you can see it's kind of covered up with gunk. A lot of this is actually from the manufacturing of this faucet. So I'm going to run the lines. It's going to clean out what's left in that faucet. I'm going to kind of rub this off, and all this is a real fine screen that your water goes through. So anytime you're having problems where it's kind of spraying around or it's not coming out, most of your sinks in your house will have this. So clean it out pretty good, let the water run. Once it's done, you just put it back in here, screw it back in. Again, I'll tighten it with the screwdriver, but just to show you what it looks like. That's it. All right, so now we got the sink all in, it's all plumbed up, everything's working fine, but I still have this gap in the back. And if you remember from the beginning of the video, I told you it's hollow under here. So if any water goes under here, it's gonna go right out underneath the bottom of the sink. And this is only happening because of this curved part of the counter. So I have a couple options here, right? I could just caulk the whole thing in with silicone and be done with it, but that's probably not gonna look that great. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use something called a tile profile. It's a piece of metal that's made for kind of wrapping around tiles, and that's how I'm going to fill it in. I'm going to use both silicone and that to kind of make it work. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so this is what they call a metal profile. It's this particular one's made by a company called Schluter. It's a German tile manufacturer company. But what essentially is going to happen is I'm going to cut this to size and slide it in there with some silicone, and then I have some joints that I'm going to use to make a nice 90-degree bend on both sides. So I'm going to cut that up, fit that, and show you what I'm talking about. All right, so I've measured out. I need about 20 inches of material. So I'm just going to make sure I'm catching in the metal shavings. I'll vacuum this up in a minute. I'll cut it to size, and then I'll test fit it. All right, so this is what some of the pieces look like when they're kind of dry fit. I did have these corners that I bought, these Schluter corners, but it's not going to work out because it needs to be a little bit thicker. So what I'm doing is essentially overlapping it. So I cut this piece, and here's a little pro tip. You might have to cut back some here on the edge to get it to overlap correctly. So as long as you're not cutting the top part, if you're cutting behind it, it doesn't matter. It's going to get hidden. So now if I slide this piece over here to the side and then slide this piece here, once I silicone that in, it's going to be a nice clean look. And then the exposed metal there, I can just touch up with a black Sharpie. So unfortunately, I forgot to turn the camera on while I was doing this part. But what I did is after I cut and fit the pieces, I ran my caulking gun all around there to get a nice bead to seal it up. And then I basically just pressed these pieces in there. So now I have a nice clean edge around there. When that dries off, I might do like one small outer layer of silicone around it. I'll probably tape over the trim just to be double sure. And then that's it. That's the final product. So hopefully you like this video, especially if you're trying to put these IKEA sinks in. This is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is just buying the kind of countertop that you can cut with just cutting through wood. But either way, I think they look nice. So hopefully you enjoy the video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up, share it, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks.